Hi, this is Bruce Lindsay working with Liz Gallo on our project to document the stories of veterans. Today we are with Gunter Sontag. Gunter was a corporal in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. However, his story is extremely interesting because of the fact that he was raised in Nazi Germany during World War II. He was indoctrinated into the Nazi propaganda, but later, after the war, moved to the United States, and 6 months after moving here, joined the U.S. Army, shortly before the beginning of the Korean War.
His name, Sontag, Gunter W., of Hanover, Pennsylvania.
So why don't you tell us about where you were growing up and how you went through the times in Germany growing up?
Oh, yes. I was born in 1929. I lived there until 1947. I was a child of National Socialism, totally, completely indoctrinated by the system until 1945. You can keep asking questions.
You talked about how when you went into school and how the indoctrination works. I really want to...
Well, yes, indoctrination starts as you enter public school. From the first day on, misinformation or information, to us it was true information, was fed into us a little bit at a time. And within a couple of years, you have become totally and completely indoctrinated to whatever the system wants you to do. You become a believer, and once you're in it, it's very difficult to get out of it, almost impossible.
So you went into the German army.
Yes, I was mustered in at the age of 16 in February 1945. I got called into the Airborne at Dresden for military service in early April 1945. When the war was practically over, the Russians already stood at Silesia, and Patton's Third Army was in central Germany. So we had a very, very wise, very humane company commander. He said, "Boys, let me tell you, it's over. You better go home. But walk at night and hide during the day, because if they catch you, if the military police catches you, they might well string you up as deserters." So it took us 3 days to walk home. And we made it, luckily.
So then shortly after that, the war was over, correct?
The war was over. The war was over on 9th May 1945. And we had been occupied by Patton's Third Army. And he occupied this part of Germany all the way to the Elbe River. Remember, the Americans and Russians met at Torgau, the Elbe River, somewhat north of Dresden. But then, according to the agreement of Yalta, Patton had to withdraw, and the Russians were now coming into Saxony and Germany. They took over the heart of Germany. And this is as one of the main points of Russian expansion politics during their entire history, to get into the heart of Germany. One of Lenin's great principles. If we want a revolution, we have to start it in central Germany, not out of Russia. And that was a great mistake Eisenhower and Truman made at Yalta.
So what was it like with the Russian occupation?
How long?
What was it like?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult to explain. Germany was completely destroyed. You have to realize there was no electricity, there were no food supplies, there was no postal service, no telephone service, no railroad service. It's very difficult for you to conceive what a completely destroyed country is. Look at Gaza. That's what German cities looked like. Frankfurt, all these large places. Nothing else but piles of rubble. So you make the best of it. Everyone worked. It was very difficult to find food. People actually starved to death. Now, not the young ones. We always had ways to acquire some. But the elderly, right now, of our group, many of them just starved to death. There was no food. If there is nothing, you can't have anything. There's no McDonald's around the corner. No grocery, nothing. Empty shelves.
So what made you decide to try to get out of that East Germany?
I always wanted to leave my hometown, as a young man already. I had read too much Zane Grey and all these westerns. I said, I'm not going to stay here. I knew when I was 10 years old I would not finish my life in Germany. That was a great dream. I didn't know what I was dreaming, but it was a dream.
So then you decided at some point that you had to get out of the Russian...
1945 to 1947 were terrible years in East Germany. You have to realize what a communist rule means. It means total and complete dictatorship. Any voice against them would immediately put you into prison or you would disappear. That's the way it was. You're occupied not only by the Soviet army, but also by a communist system that watches every step you make. Now, I would have had one policy. If I had wanted to stay, I had to become a member of the Communist Party. That was the only way out, or to stay there. Join them. Then I probably would have made good advances. One of my classmates became a lieutenant general in the new East German army. Another one was running the insurance system of my home state. Another one was in the administration of my home state. So if you were willing to go along with them, you could make it. But you had to join them 100%. And the slightest deviation would mean a visit by the NKVD, the Stasi, and take you away.
So when you decided to leave, how did you get out of East Germany to the West?
Well, I knew how to do it because I knew the railroad connections to the border. And I had a friend, and we decided just in the summer of 1947 to try it. So we got to the border, only what we could carry in our backpack. Another set of clothing, another pair of shoes. We got to the border, as I told you before, along the wire protection cover. We waited until evening. It was getting dark, ready to go over, and some women, their children, a couple 100 feet down this way, also tried it. Children always make noise. And he caught him, took him away, and during that short period of time, those 10-15 minutes, we were able to get through the wire barrier. And hello, here we are, West Germany. We expected much too much, because West Germany was also more or less in rubble. But of course, Uncle Sam didn't take thing out of West Germany, as the Russians did. The Russians took everything they could out of East Germany to feed their occupation forces. In the Western Germany, the Americans brought in the Marshall Plan, started, so people at least didn't have to starve, but in the East they did.
So eventually you ended up working for the Americans in...
Uncle Sam, yes. I told you how Uncle Sam needed Germans now to take care of their guard duties, the drive trucks and so on, yes. So one morning in September 1947, I said, Uncle Sam, here I am, I want to work for you. And he accepted me and became a member of a guard unit. They called our outfit industrial police, because Germans with guns, that was absolutely a no-no in 1947. So you give the child another name, and there you were. Yes, so I pulled guard. No, I didn't really pull guard. I got myself a job in the office. I could type, I did the English. I didn't pull guard. I was much smarter than that. Like everyone else in the armed services, you find your way.
So then eventually you applied to come to the United States, correct?
Yes, in 1948, for the first time since 45, Germans were permitted to apply for an immigration visa to the United States. And as I told you before, I submitted my application, and a couple of days later, or a couple of weeks later, I was called in. I had to supply some support papers, tuberculosis investigation, Wassermann, which was syphilis. It was just another German term for syphilis. Dr. Wassermann had worked in that field. Yes, it was all right. And another 6 months later, they called me in, said, yes, everything is in order, but we need your affidavit of support from an American citizen. And as I told you before, 1908, some members of our family had left and had come to Baltimore and Hoboken, New Jersey. And I was lucky again. They sent me the affidavit of support. And I could say, Germany, adieu. Auf Nimmerwiedersehen. And so I arrived in New York with a little suitcase and $25. That's all we could bring along, $25. Became penniless. And I came to Baltimore, and you expect that every American has a big house and a big job. No, they'd been just working men, had a little house. They've been there since 1908. The house was worth in those days maybe $5,000. Their total wealth was $8,000. And he made only his money by working in the naval yard in Baltimore during the war. That's what, for the first time, he made some money. Otherwise, it was just jobs here, jobs there. And by profession, he was a blacksmith. And they were living in Baltimore out near Morrill Park. That's Washington Boulevard. His job was out on Reisterstown Road in the farm country. So every day he went downtown with a streetcar, went out to Reisterstown Road to do his job. And he got paid not in money, but in kind. Because some of these farm folks did not have much money. But they had eggs and meat and whatever. And we, of course, when you live in Europe, you think, come to this country, everyone has everything they want. Not so. People don't realize how many very poor people there were that came over during the 20s, during the 30s, into the 40s. The first time they really made money was World War II. Yes.
So you were here for a few years, and then you decided to join the U.S. Army, correct?
I was here 6 months. I knew, Uncle Sam, here I come. Didn't have anything better to do. I told you. Adventurism. You're young. You can do anything. Yes, so my first job was to make candies in a candy factory. And I worked with 15 Negroes in Baltimore out on Caton Avenue. Mr. Spector, he was a Galician Jew. Nice fella, but peculiar, Cat on a hot tin roof. This is that. And he just at the sideline came in the morning and he made himself breakfast. 4 scrambled eggs and a couple big spoons of cherry marmalade. That's what he slobbered in. That's true. It's not a made-up story. And he had 2 sons that worked business with him. One was Spector, the other one, Yasha. Yasha and Spector. And in the morning, he called him to his desk, and that's the way he talked to them. Yasha and Spector, you 2 sons of a bitches, that's what you're going to do today. Sorry. Pardon the language.
So that's where you were working
I
until you went into...
no, I was just a handyman. I did this. I was very lucky that he gave me that job. You know, I mean, my folks had no connections. They were just working men. So a friend next door, he said, I'm going to talk to him. Maybe you can use him. Yes. 15 Negroes. And we had so many laughters. We really had a good time. Good time.
So that was before you went into the Army?
Before I joined. And as I told you before, candy making comes to a halt at Christmas time. And there's very little to be done until the Easter orders have to be. And he cut us from 40 hours down to 30. And I just couldn't live on it. I didn't want to live on it. And Uncle Sam was the only one that would take care of me. And he did for 3 years.
So what date did you join the Army? What month?
In January.
1950.
January 1950, I said, I do. And I did.
So then, not too long after that, Korean War broke out, right?
Yes, we went through basic. And then he called me to something, he called it non-commissioned officers school. A 4-week course, which was a lot of BS, you know. But you know how the Army works. That's the way we do it. And from there, I went straight to Fort Benning to the parachute training.
So you went in, initial boot camp was in, your initial boot camp was where?
Again?
Your initial training?
The training, I had Fort Dix.
Fort Dix?
Yes, 9th Division, Fort Dix, 9th Infantry.
And you...
Normandy Landing.
And you specifically volunteered to be a paratrooper, correct?
Later on. I didn't know what I was doing as I got into the... What did I know about Uncle Sam's Army? We were greenhorns. But we had the spirit.
But
yeah.
Then you got sent after basic training.
As I was in, I said, that's for me to go, because you get an extra $50 a month. Mm-hmm. $50, the monetary angle, you know. And then they give that little thing called jump rings. Mm-hmm. You're no longer a straight leg now, you know. All these terms that you learn. Yes. So I found myself there in Fort Benning for 6 weeks or whatever it was. From there to Fort Bragg. From there to the 11th Division in Fort Campbell, the 187th Combat Team. And from there into Korea.
And when did you enter Korea?
Late September 1950. I think MacArthur had executed his landing earlier in September, if I'm not mistaken. I may be off a couple of days. But we came, they took us into the Seoul airport, and from there, all the way up to North Korea. I met my unit north of Pyongyang, very close to the Yalu River. That was in the fall 1950.
What was your unit when you went into Korea?
Well, they had gone in, they had made the first combat jump at Sukchan-Suwon to cut off the retreating North Vietnamese going north. And they had then probably doing some occupation duty. That's what we did, primarily occupation duty. We had to guard a giant radar station about 50 miles south of the Yalu River. That's why we knew that something was going on up there, that the Chinese were massing up. And then they came in after Thanksgiving, 1950. They brought us, believe it or not, never experienced something like this. They brought us a Thanksgiving dinner up on line. We even had ice cream as dessert. Can you imagine ice cream up on line, a Thanksgiving dinner? The Germans would be giving their soldiers a piece of bread and a piece of cheese. And we had ice cream and a full dinner.
So there was a lot of activity when the Chinese came across.
Well, you know, no one expected it. They didn't expect it. They expected it, but they didn't let us know. They might not come in. And they suddenly overnight came. The trumpets, you could hear them everywhere. And we started packing. And, excuse me, lady, trying to get our asses out. And we had it, as I said, we had it relatively easy on that part of Korea because it was largely level, not like where the 1st Division was over in the Chosin, the mountain areas. We had some hard times getting out, had to fight our way out, but we had the help of the Australian P-51s. They helped us get out. They were our angels. Whenever the sun came, there's those beautiful things called fire bombs, napalm.
Is that about the time that you were wounded?
That was late. No, that was during May 51 when we counterattacked the Spring Offensive, the Great Spring Offensive of 1951. Well, let's not call it, let's scratched. We got scratched. The day they get wounded, we got scratched. Medic, take a look. Put a bandage on, stick it on, keep on going.
So you weren't out of the line for very long?
No, just a couple hours. Just a couple hours. Well, where else would we go? If you're retreating, there's no place to go. You have to retreat with him or get lost. That's why I always, when I think of this man Kerry, who became our foreign secretary, you know, I mean, the one that handles. Now, he was in the Vietnam War, he was on a PT boat. And he got 3 Purple Hearts. 3 Purple Hearts. And someone asked him during his election campaign, "Can I see your wounds?" He never showed them. That's how easy it was to get Purple Hearts if you were at the right location, had the right friends. You know, I don't have to tell you. You know how the system works. Mm-hmm. So where were we? On the withdrawal now, yes. We made it out to Seoul on the river there at Monsanee, and that's where we spent our Christmas and New Year and waited for the spring offensive of the North Korean and the Chinese. And luckily, as I said, the 29th English Brigade, they took the brunt of the attack. They had almost more than 50% casualties. And we were just about 2 miles on this side. And a massive thrust came right there at him. And they kept coming and coming and coming. Yes.
So after the counteroffensive, your unit was eventually taken off the line and sent?
Well, you really don't recall it. You're off the line, but most of the time we were on line or immediately behind. We didn't have all that many troops. We had a thin line. It's not that you could go back in the reserve for 4 weeks and then you come back. You were up on line most of the time.
But eventually you got sent back to Japan, right?
No, our most fighting intensive time was really during the spring of 1951 when we pushed them back to establish the 38th parallel. I remember one thing. The Chinese attacked. The 2nd Division was actually defending this sector. And the Chinese attacked with probably 100,000 men, a massive attack of 100,000 men. And the 2nd Division was dug in, but they eventually got overrun. And later on, we had to go in and try to push them and clean it out. And we still took some of the wounded ones out of the foxholes. The Chinese did not touch them. The North Koreans would have killed them. And for a mile and a half, you could nothing see but dead Chinese. There was a massive attack right into concentrated fire. Now, how are you going to stop 100,000 attackers if you have maybe 10, 12,000? Yes, that was real war. Just FDR said, we need more war, Eleanor.
So when was your unit pulled out of Korea?
We were pulled out mid-June 1951, and we went to Peppu in Japan on the island of Kyushu. Yes, and there, as I said before, I was able to get myself transferred out to General Headquarters in Tokyo. And that was the wise decision I made, even though it was difficult to come by, but I did it. By this time I had learned some of the ways and means the army works, the people you have to know, the people you have to circumvent. And you know, you have a few friends here or there. But I did not want to go back to Korea. Our unit was actually scheduled to return, but in Peppu in Japan, we had what was called, it's an abbreviation. If you had 6 months of duty, they would take you off the line and send you back home. And so our unit was really thinned out. All the good buddies, they were sent home. We got new replacements in. And, you know, what you do, it takes a long time to bring a unit up to cohesion. The trust in your buddies. And I said, it didn't work out. It was terrible. You have to excuse me if I throw these things in. The line around the medical building was a half a mile long. They all came down with clap. Bad. Officers and enlisted men. And it took them a long time to reestablish discipline. We had one Polish fellow in my platoon. We were going out on maneuvers, and instead of going into the train, he made a left turn and went to see his Musame for 2 weeks. That was the level of discipline. And it takes a long time to get a unit up to that different strength, that combat readiness. But I suppose that happens with most units. That's one bad thing about the American Army. Not so the English Army, especially or the German Army. Once you belong to one unit, for as long as you stay in, this is your unit. If you belong to the Edinburgh Fusiliers, that's your unit. And we constantly do this. Let them go here, send them there, bring replacements in. And it takes a long time to recreate this cohesion. But that's the army. What are you going to do? Big men decide to do it that way.
So how long were you in Japan before you got sent?
Oh, these were my best days. Japan, I was about 1 year plus in Tokyo. That was the easy life of a GI. It was heaven on earth. Every Wednesday afternoon we had off. Saturdays and Sundays we had off. KP was done by the Japanese. Guard duty was done by the Japanese. And I got myself a job in an office with a couple of Japanese. They all spoke fluently English, highly educated. Yes, and as I told you before, I did some courier duty, deliveries, and I saw the old Japan. I still saw the old 16th century, 17th century Japan. The Japan of the samurai, the Bushido. That was a good luck. That young man that drove me, he was a university student, he called me Papa Son. We were all called Papa Son. But I guess he liked me because he knew my background was German. He was probably thinking back of the old ex Berlin, Rome, Tokyo. I guess that's why he opened up. Would make sense, wouldn't it? Sure. Yeah.
So after your tour in Japan, did you get sent back to the States?
Yes. I came back to the States and I was stationed at Fort Meade. I was now in the American Rocket Forces. In those days, in the 50s, you know, they had to protect Washington. Yes. And well, I don't know what the outfit was called, some AAA gun battalion. They were all the way over on the eastern shore, and one was up around Maryland. And then I got myself discharged. And I was going to re-enlist. I was going to make it 20 years, really. It was always. But, you know how the system works. The war had come to an end in Korea, and now they suddenly didn't need all the boys anymore. And I could have gotten a 6-year assignment to Europe. But since they didn't need people to re-enlist, and because of I also had severe frostbite, they said, no, medically we cannot accept your re-enlistment. Yes. So I took leave from Uncle Sam's army.
So we also talked about some of the things that you did after you got out of the Army. Do you want to talk about some of them?
Oh, well, you know, you're in a constant search of what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What's the best for you? I considered the park service. Well, I figured, well, maybe get established somewhere in the national park, be nice. I thought of the border patrol. Thank goodness I didn't go in there. So I started some photography, and as I told you, the coming of the Polaroid, people were taking their own pictures. There was no chance. So eventually I went back to the VA, and I said, I need your help. And they helped me. They said, yes, we can give you 10 semesters of college. As I had told you, 1,000 state teachers didn't have the standing, but eventually got into the University of Maryland. And within 4 years, I got my bachelor's and my master's. And then I went to Europe. I was going to do some graduate work on Haushofer. Probably it doesn't ring a bell. Karl Haushofer was the man who established geopolitics in the 1880s, 90s. Spent a lot of time in Japan. The combination of geography, politics, warfare. And I wanted to do some research on him as to his influence in Switzerland during those years and in Paris. So we spent 6 months in Switzerland and 6 months in Paris. And then one day I got a letter from the dean of the graduate school at Maryland, with whom I had worked, and he said, Mr. Sontag, are you interested in teaching German? I figured, why not?
That should be easy.
And I got myself a teaching job at Maryland, and I there for a total of 7 years. And as I said, I continued to work with Dr. Prang in history, became his assistant. These are good years, interesting years. Yes, and then I taught for 20 years. McDonough School in Baltimore, Reisterstown, the military school. You've probably heard of it. A real good teaching institution. Military discipline, you close your door and you could teach. Anyone that didn't properly function, you write a little slip to Major Levy, He called them in on Saturday morning. Everyone got a rake, and they had to rake leaves for 4 hours. Discipline was no
Was this a high school or a...
high school, from the first grade to the end of high school. Beautiful place to teach. But you, on your salary, you starve. You can starve to death. Yes. And then I came to Westminster High eventually. And in the morning there, when they came out of the school buses, half of them were high. That's why they called it a high school in those days. But it was an excellent experience, and I had great students, you know. 4-year students.
Yeah, you told me the story about Dr. Prang and the guests
Dr.
that he brought.
Prang, yes.
The guests that he brought to the...
Who wrote Torah.
Yeah.
Yes. I worked with Dr. Prang at Midland. I worked as his assistant for 1 year. And I told you the seminars were usually handled at the professor's home. And so at one time he said, next week I'm going to have a visitor, interesting person. He didn't say who he was, but Prang was always a little bit, let me call him obscure. And the door opened and the Japanese comes in. Fluent English, and he introduced him. Former Colonel Gender of the Japanese Imperial Navy. And little by little he found out that Gender was in the first attacking row at Pearl Harbor. And they had become friends when Dr. Prang was with MacArthur's historical division in Tokyo, yes. So by this time, Gender again, maybe said this before, he would become the air attaché of the New Japan in Tokyo. Hallelujah. From deadly enemies to good friends now.
So you've talked about a lot. What would you say is one takeaway you would give to other people or young people about your experience?
It's very difficult. It's a different generation. I mean, look, I said already when I was teaching at Westminster, I said something is wrong here. Something doesn't jive, especially in the social studies department. They were telling these youngsters, 17, 18 years old, you're so good, when you get yourself a job, you got to make that much money. That's wrong. Instead of telling them you have your first job, you apply yourself, you do your best, you learn, you proceed. And you could feel that restlessness. These young teachers coming out of college, especially the English department, these modern ideas, what we today call the woke system, that was already there in the 70s and the 80s. That's not new. That's not new. We weren't not even able to prevent him from not smoking in the school property. They had to grant them their own smoking rooms. During the lunchtime they had, and outside, to have their smoke. And you give them this little bit at a time and they take over. It's a different world of behavior. Now, at one time at Westminster High, they hated me. At one time I said, okay, graduation now. You graduate, down there I have buses. Every male climbs in that bus, take you up to Fort Dix for 2 years military service. Oh dear, I had really said the wrong thing. That goddamn crowd. What does he think he is? But I had a lot of fun teaching, had a lot of fun. because I could say things, I could do things that no other teacher could do, because of my experience, because of my certificates, you see. That was a great experience, teaching at high school. We had excellent students, but the majority completely disrupted.
So one of the things you talked about earlier was how Americans think they couldn't be indoctrinated, and you were trying to explain.
Oh yes, at McDonough we had long discussions. There was a time the Vietnamese War came. Oh no, before I serve, I'm going to go up to Canada. They were actually ready to go to Canada in order to not get drafted. Yes, and I told them, I understand your problems, and we talked about indoctrination. And I told them, I indoctrinate you if I have you all by myself 6 months. I cut off all the outside information that you're getting. No newspaper, no television. Whatever you read is highly sensitive, what I want you to. And I feed it you in little pieces. Look at this way, maybe that's a better way. And this, after 1 week, oh no, a lot of BS, I don't. The third and fourth week, maybe there's something to it. And little by little, you get them. And in 6 months, you're right. I go out and protest, like these protesters today. Most of them aren't even Americans that are out protesting. We don't do anything about it, do we? They're non-Americans. They come to this country, they have a visa, they're visitors, and they get involved in political processes. And nobody does anything about it. Boy, I'd take their visa, put them on the next aircraft, and send them back. That's where you protest. Bitteschön, that's your right, but not here. You can't even say that today, especially here at home. You have to be very careful what you say. Very careful.
You certainly have been through a lot. That's a great story.
That's only half of the story. It takes time to call these things back into your memory banks. You forget so much. But in Korea, we were just like a band of brothers. It was excellent. We trusted one another. That was the way to go. We never left anyone behind. Didn't exist. Even if we took casualties, we got out one way or another. Yes. You've seen that thing, Band of Brothers. That's what they ought to show these youngsters. Mandatory viewing at every high school, with a proper introduction by history professors. But I'm dreaming, am I? Yes.
You've covered a lot of ground here. But,
Yes, there's so much more to
any specific memories that you want to share, or?
to cover. Well, I spent a lot of time in hospitals because I had very severe frostbite. And I told you, our equipment was not made for the winter war in Korea. If we think about here, it goes 20, it's unbelievably cold there up near Manchuria, up at 5,000-6,000 feet. You take your gloves off, and after a few minutes, yes. And we all had it, we had many of them were sent back because of heavy frostbite. I was lucky. In my case, it showed up after I got back I had it in Korea. I knew it was there. But in Tokyo, I spent 4 weeks in the general hospital. Hands, face. And then at Fort Meade again. And then I was 4 months up at the Bronx General Hospital in New York in 1953. Totally disabled, swollen, infected. It took them a long time to get me. They'd wrapped me up in all kinds of bandages, and the nurse came by 2 hours and sprayed a boric acid solution into these bandages, and they fixed me up. And I've been fighting this even today. I still, in the winter, I have to cream in my hands and my face. And they give you a 10% disability. Today they would get 50, 60%. But we didn't ask for it. No? We never even asked for it. The VA came and said, you have this here, why don't you apply for it? No. You don't. We were of a different mindset.
Really appreciate it. That was an incredible
Well,
story.
it was my pleasure. It's really the first time I talked to such a length.